Hello, ladies, and welcome to the He Man Woman Haters Club. Yes, we are open for business. Today's topic is going to be a continuation from yesterday or the day before, continuing with the woman thou art loosed and the patriarchy. So let me share my screen. The first thing we're going to talk about is misogyny. Let's get a clear definition on what that is and how to spot a misogynist. So, this article is from Psychology Today. It says 12 ways to spot a misogynist. And a misogynist is basically men who hate women, men who hate women. They may not consciously realize it, but their acts reveal just that. The misogynist. You may have heard of them, but what you may not realize is that they can be anywhere around you. They are notoriously hard to spot. They do not come with a label attached, and they may even come across as pro woman. In most cases, misogynists do not even know that they hate women. Misogyny is typically an unconscious hatred that men form early in life, often as a result of trauma involving a female figure they trusted. An abusive or negligent mother, sister, teacher, or girlfriend can plant a seed deep down in their brain's subcortical matter. Once planted, this seed will germinate and begin to grow. The tiny root, working its way into the fear processing and memory areas of the brain, as its tiny stem works its way into frontal areas of the brain, affecting emotion and rational decision making. The first signs of misogyny are barely noticeable, but with additional exposure to neglect, abuse, or lack of treatment, this behavioral seeding will grow larger and more prominent. But even when the misogyny reaches maturity and a tendency toward acting with hatred toward women can no longer be controlled, the misogynist and the women around him will often fail to notice the condition until it's too late. The following traits are typical of the misogynist. He will zero in on a woman and choose her as his target. Her natural defenses may be down because he's flirtatious, exciting, fun, and charismatic at first. As time goes on, he begins to reveal a Jekyll and Hyde personality. He may change quickly from irresistible to rude, and from rude back to irresistible. He will make promises to women and often fail to keep them. With men, on the other hand, he will almost always keep his word. He will be late for appointments and dates with women, but be quite punctual with men. His behavior toward women in general is grandiose, cocky, controlling, and self centered. He is extremely competitive, especially with women. If a woman does better than him socially or professionally, he feels terrible. If a man does better, he may have mixed feelings about it, but he is able to look at the situation objectively. He will unknowingly treat women differently from men in workplace and social settings, allowing men various liberties for which he will criticize female colleagues or friends. He will be prepared unconsciously to use anything within his power to make women feel miserable. He may demand sex or withhold sex in his relationships, make jokes about women or put them down in public, borrow their ideas in professional context without giving them credit, or borrow money from them without paying them back. On a date, he will treat a woman the opposite of how she prefers. If she is an old style lady who prefers a gentleman who holds the door for her, orders for both, and pays for the meal, he will treat her like one of his male buddies, order for himself, and let her pay for the whole meal if she offers, and sometimes even if she doesn't. If she's a more independent type who prefers to order her own meal and pay for herself, he will rudely order for both and pay the check while she goes to the bathroom. Sexually, he likes to control women and gives little or no attention to their sexual pleasure. Foreplay, if it occurs at all, is only a necessary means to an end. He likes oral sex, but only as a recipient. His favorite positions enable him to avoid looking the woman in her eyes. He will cheat on women he is dating or in a relationship with. Monogamy is the last thing he feels he owes a woman. He may suddenly disappear from a relationship without ending it, but may come back 3 months later with an explanation designed to lure the woman back in. Only rarely will a misogynist possess every one of these traits, which makes it harder to identify them. Their ability to lure women in with their charm and charisma adds to the difficulty of spotting the early warning signs. Women haters unconsciously get off on treating women badly. Every time they can put down a woman or hurt her feelings, they unconsciously feel good because deep down in their hidden brain, their bad behavior is rewarded with a dose of the pleasure chemical dopamine, which makes them want to repeat the behavior again and again. And I'm sure many of you can relate to that. So now I want to talk about um, women in Christianity. I'm just going to read a little bit of this. So, the roles of women in Christianity can vary considerably today as they have varied historically since the third century New Testament church. This is especially true in marriage and in formal ministry positions within certain Christian denominations, churches, and parachurch organizations. Many leadership roles in the organized church have been prohibited to women, but the majority of churches now hold an egalitarian men and women's role equal view regarding women's roles in the church. In the Roman Catholic and Orthodox churches, only men may serve as priests, elders, or deacons. Only males serve in senior leadership positions such as pope, patriarch, and bishop. Women may serve as abbesses, let's see the definition. Never mind. Most mainstream Protestant denominations are beginning to relax their long-standing constraints on ordaining women to be ministers, though some large groups, most notably the Southern Baptist Convention, are tightening their constraints in reaction. Almost all charismatic and Pentecostal churches were pioneers in this matter and have embraced the ordination of women since their founding. Christian traditions that officially recognize saints as persons of exceptional holiness of life do list women in that group. Most prominent is Mary, mother of Jesus, who is highly revered throughout Christianity, particularly in Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy, where she is considered the mother of God. Both the apostles Paul and Peter held women in high regard and worthy of prominent positions in the church, though they were careful not to encourage anyone to disregard the New Testament household codes, also known as the New Testament domestic codes or Hostafilin. There were efforts by the apostles Paul and Peter to encourage the brand new first century Christians to obey the patria potestas or the rule of the fathers. Greco-Roman law The New Testament written record of their efforts in this regard is found in Colossians 3:18 through 4, Ephesians 5:22, 1 Peter 2:13, Titus 2 and 1, 1 Timothy 2 and 1, 3 and 8, 5:17, and 6:1. As may be seen throughout the Old Testament and in the Greco-Roman culture of New Testament times, patriarchal societies placed men in positions of authority in marriage, society, and government. The New Testament only records males being named among the 12 original apostles of Christ. Yet, women were the first to discover the resurrection of Christ. Some Christians believe clerical or clergy ordination and the concept of priesthood postdates the New Testament and that it contains no specifications for such ordination or distinction. Others cite uses of the terms presbyter and episcopus and 1 Timothy 3 1 through 7 or Ephesians 4 11 through 16. The early church developed monastic tradition, which included the institution of the convent, through which women developed religious orders of sisters and nuns. Important ministry of women, which has continued to be to the present day in the establishment of schools, hospitals, nursing homes, and monastic settlements. Okay, that's it on that. Now I want to read this When Women Are the Enemy, the intersection of misogyny and white supremacy. Every day, as virulent white supremacists make their hatred known, we immediately and rightly call them extremists. We have not been nearly as unequivocal in our condemnation when it comes to men who express violent anger toward and loathing for women. In fact, these groups warrant a side by side examination. There is a robust symbiosis between misogyny and white supremacy. The two ideologies are powerfully intertwined. While not all misogynists are racist, and not every white supremacist is a misogynist, a deep sealed loathing of women acts as a connective tissue between many white supremacists, especially those in the alt right, and their lesser known brothers in hate like insults, involuntary celibates, MRAs, men's rights activists, and PUAs, pickup artists. This cross-pollination means the largely anonymous outrage of the men's rights arena acts as a bridge to the white supremacist and anti-Semitic ideology of the alt-right. After all, it's not a huge leap from women's quest for equal rights threatens my stature as a man to minorities and women's quest for equal rights threaten my stature as a white man. It also means that to fully comprehend either white supremacy or misogyny, we have to attempt to understand both. ADL considers misogyny a dangerous and underestimated component of extremism, and this report makes the start of an ongoing effort to investigate the ways in which people in the white supremacist, incel, and MRA orbits feed and inform one another's poisonous hatred of women. The alt-right's woman problem. The fact is, when you give women rights, they destroy absolutely everything around them. Hmm. No matter what other variable is involved. Even if you become the ultimate alpha male, some stupid will still ruin your life. Andrew Anglin, DailyStormer.com. The alt-right is defined by its white supremacist and anti-Semitic ideology. But when alt-righters talk about the women who are standing between them and their rightful position, their language is virtually indistinguishable from what you can find on misogynistic MRA or incel message boards. MRAs, or men's rights activists, believe that men are being victimized by employment and family law, among other things. Incels, or involuntary celibates, believe that all men deserve to have sex with women on demand and without regard for women's interest or preference. Both groups are explored in more detail later in this piece. Men who hate women. Masking fear, sexual insecurity, or ignorant devotion to ideological misogyny are vocal within the sit right, the alt right, which enjoys a synergetic bond with the more specifically misogynistic extremist movements like incels and MRAs. Alec Manassian, who killed 10 people, 8 of whom were women, in April 2018, Toronto ban attack, and neo-Nazi Andrew Anglin are among the most visible examples of this hatred, but they are far from unique. The misogyny of the manosphere, the world of Rouge, the screen name of pickup artist progenitor Dariush Velezdet, and others who populate the men's rights biosphere and online message boards that promote a toxic iteration of masculinity, like Reddit's Red Pill forum, is very much at home in the alt-right world. One prominent case in point before he became one of America's most recognizable white supremacists, Christopher Cantwell frequently frequented men's rights websites and posted misogynistic rants on his blog. Alt-right blogger Matt Forney cross-posts some of his choicest anti-female sentiments to the MRA website Return of Kings, including the vagina is the perfect representation of the nature of females, an empty vessel, a hole, a void with no identity of its own. Without a man to fill her with his essence, she is as useless as a crabapple rotting on the sidewalk. Alt-writers and other white supremacists frequently refer to women as thoughts, which stands for that hoe over there. Say your worst enemy is not Jews, white man, but your own females. Alt-right women are called tradhots, a reference to their idealized traditional role and their putative hotness. Perhaps no one bridges the worlds of men's rights, misogyny, and alt-right racism more adeptly than F. Roger Devlin, a longtime white nationalist academic. He argues that women's liberation has actively hurt white men's ability to procreate because when white women have choices, they are less likely to get married, have children, and perpetuate the white race. Devlin has spent much of his career decreeing the rise of self-actualized women who threaten the existence of white people by suggesting there may be something more to life than breeding six warriors while being a happy Hofstra, as one poster on altright.com put it. Devlin bemoans that women have gained too much power, which has upset the natural order of things. Where Devlin argues that women are ruined by having too many choices, Daily Stormer found in neo-Nazi Andrew Anglin wants to remind women that they're lucky to get a man, any man at all, and are worthy of little other than male violence and contempt. In a March 2017 rant, apparently sparked by Brad Pitt's weight loss following the end of his marriage to Angelina Jolie, Anglin launched his full-scale attack on women, including white women, whose cooperation he presumably needs to pull off his racist master plan. In typically self-aggrandizing style, Anglin referred to himself as the tip of the spear against the feminist menace, writing, "The fact is, when you give women rights, they destroy absolutely everything around them, no matter what other variable is involved. Even if you become the ultimate alpha male, some stupid bee will still ruin your life." Worried about losing a wife or a girlfriend once you express these opinions? There's no need for that, England writes. Women crave men who call them stupid and claim they shouldn't have any rights. They also crave being tied up, beaten, and raped. If there were any lingering doubts about his misogyny, England returns to this trifecta of abuse in July 2018, writing, "Look, I hate women. I think they deserve to be beaten, raped, and locked in cages." England attempts to proactively deflect any criticism by maintaining that anyone who suggests that men who are this angry with women might not be very popular with women is ignoring the fact that women should be grateful to be with any man. What I am talking about is a social phenomenon where men are told that if they are unsuccessful with women, it is their fault. And it isn't just the whores themselves who support this particular bit of nonsense, other men will back them up. This is a common refrain from among MRA, incels, and alt-right misogynists. A woman should be obviously and profoundly grateful for any man's attention, and if she's not, she deserves to be kicked, sometimes literally, to the curb. The link between racist, anti Semitic ideology and misogyny is also apparent via the cases of many alt writers and other white supremacists who have been charged with or explicitly advocate for domestic violence. White supremacist Richard Poplowski, J.T. Reddy, Matthew Heimbach, and William Fears II have all been implicated in domestic violence related crimes. In 2017, England told readers on Gab that he's in favor of wife beating. England has apparently been wooing MRA crossover support for some time. In 2015, he posted a diatribe on the Daily Stormer in which he expressed his great respect for women in the white supremacist movement, but also announced that he was turning the website into a boys' club and would no longer post women's writing or radio shows. He cited the large number of young men he encountered on men's rights message boards who were desperate for a male-focused ideology and figured he'd have a better chance of attracting them to the site if he ditched any pretense of gender inclusion. This is the moment when England began to fully adopt the language of the manosphere. Women's biological imperative is to seek out and attach emotionally to men in power, he writes, until a better man comes along. Women are too emotional to make decisions are and are incapable of controlling their own behavior. England argued, when both individual male and institutionalized male morality are absent, as they usually are in our present society, the woman will tend to revert to a state of amorality. Women as housekeepers with wombs. In 2017, famously publicity averse white supremacist and alt right figure Greg Johnson was caught on tape airing his views on women's reproductive rights and bodily agency. Get rid of all voluntary birth control, he told Patrick Hermanson, who spent a year undercover with and often recording members of the alt right. Voluntary birth control means that people who are far-sighted and responsible restrict their fertility, Johnson went on, and people who are impulsive and stupid don't. So you can't leave birth control up to the individual. He decreed the trend of women having children later in life and offered a solution to maintain the viability of the white race. Women are postponing childbearing because of education and their careers. Say you give a woman a free year of education for every child she rears and takes care in the home up to the age of 6. Okay, so maybe by the time she's 30, she's ready to go off to college or something. Johnson's opinion is fairly prevalent in alt-right circles. Richard Spencer told Newsweek he's not sure women should have the right to vote. Matt Forney wrote, as men, it is our responsibility to bring girls back to their proper place, to lead them into their natural roles as wives and mothers. We men do not choose or reward girls for their clown college degrees, their meaningless cubicle jobs, or their supposed intelligence. We reward them for their willingness to please us and make us happy, and in doing so, make themselves happy. No amount of phony education or career success will scratch that deep itch in a girl's soul, the desire to serve a man. In June 2017, the white supremacist group Vanguard America promoted their women's division, tweeting, the woman has her own battlefield. With every child that she brings into the world, she fights her battle for the nation. Strong nations grow from strong families. A recent exchange on the altright.com message board headline, The Woman Question, an echo of the ubiquitous white supremacist Jewish question, asked participants to weigh in on women's functionality. One poster responded, seriously, the only role women play in this movement is donating their husband's money. As another poster put it, women should be building their own selves and collaborating to relearn the noble art of motherhood and only as a secondary activity spread the gospel of femininity over feminism to a female audience. Others are slightly less gentle in their assessment of women's biological value. I would vigorously moan the living hell out of my English teacher. Like, I don't care if it's miscegenation. That babe would be pregnant as F year after year, around the clock, acting as a hub of genetic imperialism. That's for Sam Woodford, the 20-year-old Adam Waffen division member. Hold on. The 20-year-old Adam Waffen division member who is accused of the brutal 2018 murder of 19-year-old Blaze Bernstein, who was likely targeted for being Jewish and gay. Women of the alt-right, Forever 1950. While women's place in the alt-right remains a hot-button issue, the terms of the debate are narrow, to put it mildly, and would undoubtedly please any MRA. One side argues that women need to focus on their natural duties of childbearing and supporting their husbands, while the other maintains that while women should be mothers and housekeepers first, women may use any additional time to advance the cause of the white race in appropriately feminine ways in the company of other women. The latter group, which includes Red Ice broadcaster Lena Lockteff and presumably her husband, fellow white supremacist Henrik Palmgren, believe that as long as white women are having children, being dustful housekeepers, and making sure their husbands are happy, they should be encouraged to use their quote unquote free time for pro white activism. Deserving white women should feel free to dabble in white supremacy, in other words. In a 2017 interview with white supremacist and American Renaissance founder Jared Taylor, Lockteff opined, women want to be beautiful, they want a lovely home, they want to attract a male, and they want to be provided for and taken care of. That's what the alt right can provide, what nationalism can provide. She continues, as long as alt right men are providing a nice home, women will fall in line. Political engagement isn't the answer for women, Locke contends. Women aren't that interested in politics. They are easily influenced. They go with the trends. I find I can easily bring them to our side. I just challenge them a little bit. And feminism is, of course, a huge turnoff. The left is pushing this beauty ideal of the purple haired, overweight feminist. No truly attractive women want to be associated with that. When Taylor asks Lockstep to define the ideal alt right woman and wife, she responds, she's well rounded, reads, is interested in is interested fighting back against the anti-white politics, keeps a nice home, raises the kids well, teaches them about their tribal ethnic consciousness, has a good marriage, but then she might have to do a blog post or a video or produce something here and there to fight back against white anti-white politics. So that's just to touch on the racism of the gender imbalance. And now I want to talk about the gender and the construction of models of Christian activity. Mm. It's just so crazy that you keep hearing the same story over and over and over again. Every woman that I talk to is having issues with her husband, basically telling her not to talk. You can't talk. You can't have your own voice. You can't have an opinion. You can't have any feelings. You can't be emotional. So what do you do? What do we do as a group? How do we overcome this as a group? Wait, I don't know. That's weird. Do you pray your way out of it? Do you stay with someone who you know clearly hates you? Do you? I'm sorry, give me just a second. This is a really good website if you like to read articles. They give you 100 free articles per month, I think, because of the coronavirus right now. But a very good deal indeed. I have an account already, but I don't feel like finding my password. So it's very disheartening the things that I hear from sisters just all over all over the world. I talk to sisters everywhere and I hear the same story. Then that's what I call a familiar spirit, a very familiar spirit. Too many women dealing with the same damn demon. It's crazy. Okay, so gender and the construction of models of Christian activity. A case study by Dale A. Johnson. In my review of previous presidential addresses, I found it interesting to discover that only one had built upon one of the most significant cultural and scholarly developments of the past generation and perhaps the past century. That is, women's and later gender studies and their relevance for our respective fields. That was Jane Dempsey Douglas's address 20 years ago as the first woman president of this society on What Calvin Learned at the School of Women, an event that will surely be recognized in the program session tomorrow on women in the American Society of Church History. At my institution in the 1970s, the process was called, in the language of the day, consciousness raising. It started with the use of language and went from there to other complex matters. Our school's document on inclusive language appeared in 1979, only after long discussion and some serious debate. One of my own instances of consciousness raising in that period was coming upon an early 20th century book on English primitive Methodism entitled Men on Fire and Consecrated Women also. Obviously, the author found language constraining as he tried to encompass in his title the breadth of Christian activity in his denomination. Those of you who look part in similar discussions took part in similar discussions in that decade will have stories of your own of your community's engagements in the consciousness raising process. It has had such a widespread effect on thought and practice that the experiences ought not to be lost. The literature and the resources now available in the fields of women's and gender studies in many areas of religious history is simply remarkable when compared to those days when questions such as where are the women in this subject matter appeared on student course evaluations, but developments in the area in which I mostly work, modern European Christianity, have been considerably less than those marked. For example, in late antiquity, medieval or early modern studies, or American religious history, the concentration of research in this area into smaller chronological periods, regional or national geographies, and individual religious traditions has certainly limited the appearance of more synthetic assessments or evaluations of broader impacts. Further, the European 19th century has not been thought to be especially interesting with respect to questions of religion and gender, at least when compared with other eras. In Britain, one word may represent that perspective, Victorian, but there are broader connotations as well. The word is taken to represent the full flowering of ideology of genderized virtue or the consolidation of the middle class with its revised gender expectations of women being regarded as more moral and more religious than men. Few people talked about political, social, and economic equality for women. The feminism that developed in the second half of the century was not nurtured or supported within the church. All this has no doubt discouraged the investigation of the larger topic for the 19th century. Similar points could be made about other European countries and cultures. In much of the scholarship of the last 2 decades, the reigning framework has moved from separate spheres to the feminization of religion. Yet the new label is hardly more enticing, applying helpfully to issues relating to demographics and recreational access, but less well to the challenges and opportunities the century's great change put before religious people. Both tend to be used to end discussion rather than to set up a problem to be investigated, and neither helps to point to the struggles or the gains or to those who tried in one way or another to press boundaries, to contest authority, or even to respond to perceptions of new of need in new ways. Eventually, wherever we work, the so what question emerges as a challenge to place a topic in some larger perspective. A reviewer of my early effort to collect documents on the subject of women and religion in England from 1700 to 1925 commented, What the book does do, however, is to illustrate how slight, at least as regards modern religious history, is the addition to our knowledge which women's studies make. Some 20 years later, there is still only limited attention to the question of what difference a consideration of the question of gender has made for modern European religious history. Here, then, is a modest effort toward that end, focusing on the construction of models of Christian activity in the English 19th century, a question that, despite its apparent innocuousness, innocuousness was considerably debated over much of the century. I will take most of my illustrations from persons, activities, and movements that have not been so well covered in the research of social or religious historians. Two brief tracts provide benchmarks for this investigation. They were almost surely not widely read at the time of publication or in the decades or centuries following, although both have had new life by being republished in various forms since the 1970s. When Margaret Fell wrote Women's Speaking Justified from Prison in 1666, she was not the first advocate of women's religious proclamation, but was the hers was the most vigorous and challenging argument offered in English to that point against those who opposed what she called women's speaking. So, for the early modern period in England, see Patricia Crawford, Women and Religion in England, 1500 to 1720. No comparable survey exists for the later period. Recent collections of essays offer some suggestions of the range of scholarship that is being explored. See Anne Hogan and Andrew Bradstock, Women of Faith in Victorian Culture, Reassessing the Angel in the House. So, with no lack of biblical resources, from the creation story of Genesis 1 to the church represented as a woman in Revelation 12, from the models set forth by women in the Bible to the example of Jesus in relating to women, Fell had much to appeal to in contending against those whose norms were the perceived sanctions of 1 Corinthians 14 and 1 Timothy 2. As she argued that those texts had only local rather than universal significance, she found her primary authority in an eschatological vision. The Spirit poured out upon all flesh, and the contest between the true church and the false church, both communities being composed of men and women. In challenging established understandings of gender roles within the religious community, she contended not for all women, but for those who were part of the true church, an eschatological, not an institutional reality. Important to her argument were that the biblical precedents provided direct authority, not mediated institutionally, and that the work of the Holy Spirit gave the only ground needed for claiming a vocation. Although she did not appeal to Galatians 3 and 28, she did find much biblical support for her contention that God has put no such difference between the male and female as men would make. Florence Nightingale's Cassandra, written in 1852, before she found a vocation in the Crimea, became a tiny part of the very large suggestions for thought to the searchers for truth among the artisans of England. that was only privately printed in 1860. It was not only an outcry against social indifference to the situation of women, but a challenge to the culture to make use of the gifts of women. Is the difference between man and woman this? She asks. That woman has confessedly nothing to do. Her proposal, Christ raised women above the condition of mere slaves, mere ministers to the passions of the man, raised them by this sympathy to be ministers of God. He gave them moral activity, but the age, the world, humanity must give them the means to exercise this moral activity, must give them intellectual cultivation, spheres of action. Note both the appeal to Christ as the authority for women's moral activity and the absence of an appeal to the church for the means to exercise that moral activity. Recall, too, that this was well before women had access to the university, even longer before the receipt of academic degrees, largely because people could not imagine what one would do with this education. Nightingale posed what was, in effect, one of the great questions of the age. Whether others were similarly dubious regarding possibilities within institutional religion, Nightingale was right in her sense of things. Increased spheres of action would take place not so much outside of the institution, but at least without the planning and support of it. She lamented that the church provided no means for her to exercise her vocation, and soon thereafter she found her own means to do that. This, too, is part of the import of the question for modern religious history. Between Margaret Vale and Florence Nightingale came a number of women writers, most significant, most significantly Mary Wollstonecraft, whose A Vindication of the Rights of Women, 1792, not only claimed the revolutionary language of rights for the discussion of the social relations of the sexes, but also contended against a considerable body of 18th century advice literature that the issue was not women's nature, but the absence of meaningful education. For all of the resistance over much of the next century to the use of rights talk in general as well as in its application to women, Wollstonecraft established the ground for a new stage in the national conversation that connected education to activity and thus the wider participation of women in the society. Despite objections to much of what was viewed as Wollstonecraft's radical agenda, Hannah More and other Anglican evangelicals around the same time engaged in their own critique of the state of education for women. In 1843, the Quarterly Review, one of the leading English journals, referred to Charlotte Elizabeth Tana as a Muslim divine. The comment came in connection with the consideration of writers, especially women, who hide their names from public view. If not a compliment, it was a recognition of the voice and the vehicle for it. In a response in her own journal, Tana declared, "Women have souls, and any attempt to corrupt the saving knowledge whereby alone a sinner may attain to eternal life becomes an attack upon individual faith to be individually repelled and answered. On this ground, we respectively crave of our brethren, reverend and literary, freedom of speech, at least among ourselves." The following year, an edition of her collected works was published in the United States with an introduction by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Tana died in 1846 at the age of 55. She had been known in the publishing world as Charlotte Elizabeth, the daughter of an Anglican clergyman in Norwich. She grew up to become a strong church and king Tory, partly in reaction to the threats posed by the French Revolution and the Irish rebellions. She also became a vigorous anti-Catholic, one of the common traits of fervent Anglican evangelicals, believing that the Church of England was the most insurmountable barrier to popery and Socianism. She married a military officer and followed him first to Nova Scotia and then to Ireland. They separated in 1824. She began a literary career somewhat accidentally as a tract writer, where she left off her married name in order to protect her earnings. In 1829, the Catholic Emancipation Bill aroused her opposition, and later, in her personal recollections, she posed what eventually became the question of the day, later echoed by Florence Nightingale. But suppose a woman feels herself called upon to take a personal interest in public affairs. What can she do without stepping out of her proper sphere and introducing into the province of the superior sex? I am going to tell you what a woman may do, she went on. For of us it may surely be said, where there is a will, there's a way. When we set our hearts upon anything, we are tolerably enterprising and persevering too in its attainment. Charlotte Elizabeth was clearly more tolerably enterprising and persevering. She was invited to become the editor of a new journal, the Christian Ladies Magazine, its first issue appearing in January 1834 in her 1972 study, Women in Print, Writing Women and Women's Magazines from the Restoration to the Ascension of Victoria. Alison Adbergam counted 235 of these periodicals. In that total are 132 that began in the 18th century and 96 in just the first 4 decades of the 19th century. Many of these periodicals contained religious themes and topics, of course, but the Christian Ladies magazine was the first to use a religious adjective with the gender referent. To get some sense of the context in which Charlotte Elizabeth launched the journal, consider Adbergam's conclusion that at the end of her period, women's magazines became ever more obsessively domestic, and the atmosphere for women had begun to get claustrophobic, halting the progress women had made in the 18th century and reacting against the permissiveness of the Regency period. While the Christian Ladies magazine was intended for a middle class audience, it did not, however, focus on advice or domestic matters. One aspect of the social context involved tying the question of women's roles to the understanding of the place of religion in the larger culture. Women often bore the brunt of the exhortation to Christians to separate from the world. In one sense, the focus developed because it could, that is, the increasing number of persons in the middle class for whom it might be said that leisure was a legitimate possibility. That leisure was a legitimate possibility, whereas it could be difficult to argue the same for men who had to contend for livelihood in the world. Christian women could be admonished to be not conformed to the world's fashions, led by its opinions, or governed by its laws. Charlotte Elizabeth's Christian Ladies magazine did not so much challenge boundaries as negotiate them. Her introduction to the first issue noted the boundary assigned to women, yet that first issue opened a recurring section called Politics. It began with a feigned conversation between the editor and her uncle. Politics? Exclaimed my uncle, who very unexpectedly popped his head over my shoulder just as I had traced in well-rounded capitals the imposing word which tops this page. What in the world have you to do with politics? This plain question, propounded in a tone of mirthful surprise, somewhat discomposed me, casting an air almost of the ludicrous, over the conscious self importance with which I had been invested but a moment before. However, I mustered courage and confidently replied, "A great deal, uncle. I have undertaken to conduct the political department in the New Ladies magazine. In the interchange that follows, she wonders what is so wrong for a woman to collect the heads of a few important public events. And he observes that it is the fashion of the age for women to leave their assigned sphere to become political agitators, political economists, and whatnot. She replies that her object is quite different. In succeeding issues, the uncle comes to see the benefit to public morality when such topics are taken up, so long as the readership adorn your stations without overstepping their boundary. By the fourth issue, the uncle is encouraging the unfeminine study of political economy, especially as it would be for the sake of your poor neighbors. In the next issue, he defends the magazine against the critique of several women who believe the continuing topic of politics is unsuitable for a ladies' magazine. He uses the factory question as his main example to make the point that religion should be carried into every question of the day. In the first issue of 1835, the question is laid to rest with the following declaration. Some few friends have suggested the this okay. Okay, so moving on. Now I wanted to touch on the quote that the woman is closer to nature. Why do women feel so out of touch with the world, especially Black women, Hebrew women? All right. Let's see. There is a major attack on women of today if we do not already know that, if we cannot already see that. It may be a very subtle attack going on. Yes, yes, we want families. Yes, we want to get married. Yes, but what is this underlying hatred of women that a lot of men carry on their shoulders daily? So, nature being represented as woman. Nature is like a woman who enjoys disguising herself and whose different disguises, revealing now one part of her and now another, permit those who study her and assiduously to hope that one day they may know the whole of her person. That's Diderot. Why, this is an interesting topic. Often saw references of nature with in and sounded like a proper name sometimes with nature. The connections between nature and the female form connect the Romantic period with the start of feminism and the new strategies and approaches theorists and philosophers and writers are taking now. Possible theories for connecting women with nature. 1. Descending from precursory language such as Anglo-Saxon, Old English, Italian, Spanish, Latin, Greek, and French. 2. Based on the qualities generally associated with women and differences between gender roles. 3. Connection between woman and nature and the life cycle. 4. Biblical references. So, Languages with gendered nouns. So, Old English, Latin, Italian, French, Spanish, and Greek. All are gendered as female. Could be initial cause for why we tend to consider nature as female. The gender role of woman. Nature is feminized because it is seen as possessing the same qualities as women at the time when most of the romantic writing was produced. Women were seen as being domestic, pious, moral, pure, gentle, kind, graceful, simple, and beautiful. This was according to the nature of separate spheres. Men and women were fundamentally different in terms of their characteristics, as men were seen as hardworking, industrial, rational, assertive, independent, and proud, none of which is easily connected with nature. Therefore, nature was seen as the embodiment of all the characteristics that women possess, and there are frequent references to this in literature, especially poetry. For example, constant rotation of the unwearied wheel that nature rides upon maintains her health, her beauty, her fertility. Another one, but doubly, doubly pitying nature lovers, but doubly pitying nature loves to shower soft on his wounded heart her healing power, who plows over hills and vales on his road forlorn. Here, nature sees her fairest forms more fair, owns them as hers, yet owns herself excelled by what herself produced. Nature is always great in design. She is an admirable colorist also, and harmonizes tints with infinite variety and beauty. Nature is also feminized due to the patriarchal nature of society. Many romantic travel writers were men. Therefore, travel writing was quite gender specific, and the men were quite likely to bestow feminine qualities upon nature. For example, the picturesque retained the assumptions of gender given to it by its founders, who imagined a male art of seeing that could correct and complete what a feminized landscape held for. Women as inspiration for men. Women have a far more difficult time claiming romantic inspiration because, according to literary tradition, inspiration comes from the female muse to the male poet. Sublime, sublimity is associated with qualities of males, but was still mostly associated with the presence of nature. Conceived as feminine and maternal, beneficent as well as destructive, the high romantics used nature as an access to the masculine sublime. The sublime is specifically a male achievement gained through women as female objects or through female nature, and so is closed off to women writers. This leads to Mulvey's essay about men as the beholder and women as the subject. Woman then stands in patriarchal culture as signifier for the male other, bound by a symbolic order in which man can live out his fantasies and obsessions through linguistic command by imposing them on the silent image of the woman, still tied to her place as bearer of meaning, not maker of meaning. In a world ordered by sexual imbalance, pleasure in looking has been split between active male and passive female. As men traveled, they were separated from women and used their form in poetry to create a closeness with the female form. For the masculine ego, women and nature became instruments of self definition, and the feminization of nature suggests the romance of travel and perception. Perception is characterized by the wandering of the eye and the search for something new and of interest, which piques rather than satisfies desire. The feminizing of the object suggests the romance of perception and perhaps of travel in general. The objects that come to attention, which are singled out or seem singular of their own account, appear destined in hindsight to have brought something of personal significance. Due to the fact that male travelers didn't encounter many females during their travels, the feminization of nature could also indicate the sexual desire of the male traveler. Therefore, the process of viewing nature is parallel with the process of viewing women and selecting a possible mate. This is apparent in both travel text and poetry. 3. Connection between women and nature. Life cycle. When nature is discussed in poetry, there are usually feminine references, issues of the life cycle such as fertility, bounty, and reproduction. Example. So on her fares and to the border comes of Eden, where delicious paradise now nearer crowns with her enclosure green. Of goodliest trees, loaden with fairest fruit, blossoms, and fruits at once of golden hue. Paradise Lost, Book 4, lines 131 through 3, 147 through 8, and we will touch on that book shortly. So, the references to production and fertility may symbolize the continuity of nature. The continuity and change of seasons indicate that the earth continues in a balanced cycle, similar to the life cycle of humans. Because women are responsible for the continuity of the life cycle, they are often associated with seasons. For example, the rebirth of the land in the springtime. The concept of connecting women with nature dates back to the times of ancient classical mythology, with several goddesses being strongly connected to the earth, Persephone and Mother Demeter. Early classical mythological connections between goddesses and nature. Association with Mother Earth, because so many aspects of nature are born from the earth, this can be likened to the opening of the womb to produce life. There are several literary references to reproductive terms such as womb and bosom in Paradise Lost. Dear Nature is the kindest mother still, though always changing, in her aspect mild. From her bare bosom let me take my fill. Her never weaned, though not her favorite child. Oh, she is fairest in her features wild, where nothing polished dares pollute her path. Joy ran as blood within a living frame, when thou didst from her bosom, like a cloud of glory, arise, a spirit of keen joy. That's Prometheus Unbound. Other examples, nature has provided for all her children, a valley being destined by nature to universal fertility. Number 4, biblical Eve. Although not much literature on it, I think one can make a case for woman as nature in light of disasters such as earthquakes, the earth opening up, and tsunamis. Disasters often blamed on Mother Nature. Hurricanes named after women. Of course, Eve is the cause for sin. Maybe stretching, but woman as nature, tree as nature, apple on tree, Eve ate the apple created by woman. Example. After all, what had we seen but the hopeless struggle of men with the violence of nature? So, very, very interesting stuff. Very. So I'm gonna close out with that. I just wanna all of this is just a we're bringing to the forefront things that have been hidden, and the reason why you don't understand a lot of temperaments that males have is because of the oppression and the lies that they've been told, and these things have been instilled in our men for ages to come. So if you don't know what you're dealing with, there's no way that you can combat it. You'll think you're going insane because you see something that they don't see, or you know that you're dealing with something that they think that there's not anything to deal with. So it's just a lot. It's very heavy, a very heavy subject, especially when you're dealing with a narcissist that really thinks that they can't do any wrong, and that everything that you do is wrong. They feel like they're righteous when they're not. So let's just be encouraged and be prayerful. I will be back later with another video. Please like, share, and subscribe, and donate to the cause. Shalom, family.